Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Olympic Region Clean Air Agency meeting for May 11th. It's good to see you. We have an action-packed agenda this morning, so get ready and fasten your seatbelts. So I want to go ahead and ask for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
So a motion and a second. Any amendments or discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 And I think I skipped the introductions because I'm worried about time, but let's do a really quick roll call through the board and then through the staff. So Frank
Wolf, Pacific County Commissioner.
Greg
Brotherton, Jefferson County Commissioner.
Joan
Cathy, Tumwater City Council member.
Robin
Vasquez, she, her pronouns, Lacey City Council.
Randy
Mason County Commission.
Jill Carolina
Mejia, Thurston County Commission.
Jill. She must have something else going on. Okay, I think that's the board members that are on. Jeff, staff and council.
Sure. Jeff Johnston, Orca Executive Director. We've also got Debbie Moody, our office manager. We've got Lynn Harding, our Administrative Services Manager. Odell Hadley, Senior Air Monitoring Specialist. Mark Gooden, Engineering Manager. Jennifer DeMay, Engineering Supervisor. Robert Moody, Compliance Manager. And Dan Nelson, Communications Manager.
There's Jill. You're muted. You're muted. Jill, you have.
Sorry. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Jeff Myers.
Good morning, Jeff Myers, legal counsel, and Mike Throgmorton is also with us today.
Welcome. Did we miss anyone? Okay, let's get going, folks. So we're going to start out under Chair's report, and Greg's going to give us a report about the Finance Committee work this morning.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we had, I think, reported last month that the draft budget is getting closer. We made a recommendation today for the full board after narrowing down options to really between increasing both expenses and revenue 5.2% and increasing expenses 5.2% and increasing revenue 5.2% and expenses 3%. And after a spirited conversation, we ended at a consensus recommendation of moving the budget forward for consideration by this board in June, with increasing revenue by 5.2%, increasing expenses, including salary, by 4%. I think Lynn made a note that this is the largest year-to-year change in the budget that she remembers. And there are some significant changes coming, including an additional 2-year budget for a records staff, so a new staff member, as well as significant upgrades to the website, which will cost $25,000, and deferred maintenance on several issues, including especially IT. So a lot of IT upgrades. We will pay off our building this year, which will help. While every year, looking at the 5-year budget projections, as most 5-year budget projections I see, look at going into the red at the tail end. That is there. You know, there's significant increases all over the place, and I think that Jeff said, if we don't actually go into our reserve a little bit this year, then we won't be getting the work done that we need to do. And I think that speaks loudest to some of the important work that's on the horizon, including strategic planning. And I think I covered off the rest of it. So we'll see the whole budget come to the board in June. It took a while to get to consensus. There was compromise on all sides, but I'm pretty happy with where we're going, and you know, I think it indicates the value we put on our employees and the return that they give to this agency, while also recognizing the significant investment we need to make. And, you know, much of our budget surplus this year comes, I believe, from, you know, a higher than expected violation fee violations, and that's not how we want to make budget, right? So the education, the work of the IT and communications is going to be critical in the next couple of years, and the strategic planning that lays in front of us is a big lift for the organization, but really important to leveraging efficiency going forward and making sure that we stay true to our mission. So that's my finance report today. I would open it up to the rest of the group, if the finance committee, to see if I missed anything.
I would just add, Greg, that we actually started with as high as a 7.5% increase to match CPI at the beginning of our conversation. So we found a sweet spot.
Yes.
And if I could just jump in and let folks know, again, with the email that that Debbie sent on Friday with all of the board, with the links to all of the board materials, there was also the information sent to the finance committee. And as part of the budget was a really nice 2-page summary. So again, if you're wondering about, you want to dive in a little bit more, certainly look at that. Again, we'll be updating that information based upon the conversation and the recommendation that the finance committee made this morning. So we'll be updating those because it is a slight adjustment to one of the options we were proposing. But just encourage folks to take a look at that if you have any questions. And certainly reach out to me or to Lynn if you have any questions as well.
Yeah, that's a great addition, having that memo as a cover document. So thank you, Jeff and Lynn, for doing that.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on the budget? So we'll have that conversation next month. And please take the time to do your homework so that we can make sure everybody has an informed vote on the budget at our June meeting.
It's really our biggest decision point, right?
Yeah, totally. Especially with the new CEO. Okay, so that takes us to public comment. Do we have anything that we should hear about from communications in the last month or on the line? I don't see any public. So Jeff, anything that we should know?
No,
Okay.
no, not that I'm aware of.
Great. Okay, so that takes us to our consent agenda. I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
A motion and a second. Are there any questions, comments, or polls? All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go to an introduction to Orca emissions inventory work, and we're going to hear from engineering supervisor Jennifer DeMay. Jennifer, welcome back. There you go.
Good morning.
There you are. Actually, Jennifer, but before you jump in, before you start, if I could just give a brief introduction and sort of why I thought it would be helpful to have Jennifer here and talking to you all about the emissions inventory work. So Orca does spend quite a bit of time working on emissions inventories. Emissions inventories are a really important part of air quality management. Local air spend time on them. Certainly ecology spends a lot of time on them. The EPA spends a lot of time on them. And that information is used in a wide variety of ways, from calculating some of our fees to understanding the most important sources of pollution, and so that we can strategize on how to reduce that pollution. So Orca emissions inventories are done primarily by our engineering team, particularly Jennifer, who's here with us today, and also by Lauren Wybrew, another one of our engineers. So I asked Jennifer to prepare this introduction, kind of going over the basics of some of this work, explaining why it's important to the work that Orca does. Again, I know we are kind of short on time, but it looks like actually we got through the earlier stuff all right. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Jennifer's presentation. But definitely feel free to jump in with questions. I know if you looked at the slides in advance, it might have been kind of overwhelming, or you might have thought, oh my gosh, that's a lot of detail. But I think Jennifer's going to go through it at a good level of information and again, if you've got any questions, certainly ask during Jennifer's presentation. And so thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. Thanks for putting that together, the presentation together.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, I'm going to try to, let's see if I can share my screen, get through this. Okay, can you see the presentation screen? Is that the right one?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. I don't want to be sharing my email or something else. Okay, today I'm going to go through an overview of emission inventories. We'll go over what an emission inventory is, and then as time allows, go through 3 different emission inventories: the Ecology's Comprehensive Inventory, Orca's Point Source Inventory, and then greenhouse gas inventories. So an emission inventory by definition is a listing by source or source category of the amounts of pollutants actually discharged or emitted into the atmosphere. They're typically conducted for a calendar year and are conducted in the year or years after emissions occur. So currently Orca is working on their our point source inventory for calendar year 2021. As Jeff said, the primary purpose of emission inventories is to use in overall air quality management, including planning and policy decisions and setting priorities. That includes state implementation plan work, air quality forecasting, siting air quality monitors, and other air quality planning and rule efforts as well. There are lots of other uses for the emission inventory, especially Orca's point source inventory we use for evaluating compliance with emission and material use limits. We use it in our permitting for new source review and air operating permits. Both our Orca reports their point source emissions to EPA and Ecology annually. Both our AOP and registration programs have emission fee components to them as based on actual emissions from the previous year. We'll use the data for assessing those fees. And then of course, evaluating emissions trends and responding to and providing information to the public. There are 6 main categories of emission sources that can be inventoried. Point sources are your larger industrial facilities, electric power plants. And non-point sources are those stationary sources that are too small in magnitude to be reported as point sources. So those are typically small industrial or commercial facilities, gas stations, auto body shops. But they also include residential activities such as wood stoves and fireplaces. Mobile sources is broken down into 2 categories, on-road and off-road, or sorry, non-road. On-road sources being sources that are vehicles that can use the road, such as cars and trucks. And then the non-road sources are those that operate off the road. And they include trains, marine vessels, construction equipment, and even lawn and garden equipment. Biogenic sources are natural sources such as vegetation and soil microbes. And then the last category is event-driven sources, which have a discrete time frame to them, so include wildfires and prescribed burning. Pollutants that are included in the emission inventory are dependent on the purpose of the emission inventory. They can include criteria pollutants, which are pollutants that have an ambient air quality standard. That includes particulate emissions such as PM, PM10, PM2.5, nitrogen oxide emissions, which are NOx, sulfur dioxide, which is SO2, carbon monoxide, it's CO, and volatile organic compounds, which are VOCs. VOCs don't have an ambient air quality standard, but we regulate them as and inventory them as they're precursors of both ozone, which is a criteria pollutant, and secondary organic aerosols. Secondary organic aerosols are a major constituent of PM2.5. Other pollutants that can be inventoried are EPA's list of 188 federal hazardous air pollutants. Washington State also has their own list of toxic air pollutants that are currently at about 460 pollutants, and greenhouse gases, which I'll talk in more detail about further. I'm going to go into an inventory nexus. Anybody have any questions on anything I presented so far? Okay. Okay, I'm going to go forward then. Our first inventory I wanted to talk about was Ecology's comprehensive inventory. Ecology does a statewide inventory in conjunction with EPA every 3 years. It includes all the 6 emission source types that we talked about earlier and focuses on criteria pollutants. They do contain some hazardous air pollutants where they have that information readily available. The inventory is based on publicly available information such as population and uses EPA models and emission factors. So for example, for on-road mobile sources like cars and trucks, they use EPA's motor vehicle emissions simulator model to calculate emissions, but Ecology will gather local data such as input like vehicle miles traveled from DOT, vehicle population data from DOL, Department of Licensing, and school bus data from OSPI, and input all that information into EPA's model to get county-specific information for the state. So I put together some slides to show, compile the data from the state inventory. This is specific just to Orca's jurisdiction, so I pulled out the information for our 6 counties. And the graphs will show the contribution from the different source categories for each of, for 4 specific pollutants. So this graph here is for carbon monoxide. The primary source of carbon monoxide is from combustion sources. So as you can see, on-road mobile sources contribute over 50% of CO emissions in our jurisdiction. Other notable sources are the non-road equipment, just down here at the bottom, as well as residential wood combustion, which includes wood stoves and fireplaces. The nitrogen oxide.
Can I ask a question on the last slide?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just curious. I mean, it seems like some of these things, wildfires specifically, would vary wildly from year to year. And I was just wondering if that is true. And I guess if a big wildfire year, does it significantly change the makeup of the pie chart?
That is a good question. I did not look back at previous year's pie charts. Again, they do this, Ecology does this every 3 years rather than annually. So this is for 2017. I did not go back and look at 2014 or previous to see what the difference would be.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you.
That's okay. I am going to go through these slides a little bit quickly just for the sake of time, but they're all in your presentation information so that you can look at them in more detail later.
Jennifer, can I ask you another quick question?
Yes.
Just since you're stopped, and I apologize if you said this already, but can you just remind us who regulates on-road emissions and how, and is there ability to influence policy around that?
That is a good question. Department of Ecology retained, what's the word here? They retained the authority to regulate mobile sources. So they are the only ones that can write rules for that. I have not been following up on that type of information. I don't know if Jeff knows more, but they are the ones that are dealing with that regulation of mobile sources.
Right, and it's usually, I mean, it's the EPA primarily. I mean, some things Ecology, the state, are regulated at the state level, but primarily those are federal regulations. Again, there are what's called, so Washington recently adopted clean cars, so we're on, but we've been actually using California standards for quite a while. And so, but those are, so in terms of, Jim, your question about our ability to sort of, I think locals have pretty limited ability to.
Is that because transportation can cross state lines?
Yes, I think yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And another thing I'll point, since we just stopped, so on this, on these slides, just notice that the large point sources are relatively small part of the pie, again, relative to on-road mobile and some of these other larger sources.
Thank you, Jeff. So this slide in particular is for nitrogen oxides. NOx are also, emissions are also primarily from combustion sources. So again, your on-road mobile does contribute more than half of the NOx emissions in our jurisdiction. Non-road equipment is down here at the bottom, and then commercial marine vessels and large point sources are also are larger contributors to NOx emissions in our area. As you can see, this chart looks a bit different from the last two. Combustion sources are also a big contributor to particulate emissions. And you can see residential wood combustion and silvicultural burning as the largest contributors of from combustion emissions, which range from here all the way down to here. You'll also see that dust from roads and construction and agriculture also make up almost a quarter of the emissions of particulate. And then large point sources are also a larger contributor. Lastly, I just wanted to show you this chart for VOC emissions. It differs greatly from the other pollutants that I showed you, as the majority of the contributions come from soil and vegetation and natural sources. In addition, there are two categories on this graph that were not on the previous graphs, as they're primarily VOC sources, and that would be solvent use. That includes industrial, commercial, and consumer sources, as well as gas stations.
Sorry, what does VOC stand for?
Volatile organic compounds. So before I move on to the next section, does anybody have any questions on the comprehensive inventory?
So actually, if just to help answer Greg's question, Jennifer, could you say, so what are some examples of some VOCs?
Volatile organic compounds made up of hundreds of or thousands of different organic compounds, and they can range, things like they're typically organic compounds that contribute to ozone formation and formation. So things like methanol and I don't know why these are popping in my head, but methanol,
Ethylene, terpenes, things from trees. You've got all isoprenes, all sorts of organic chemicals that come from both natural and, as this pie chart shows, of some human, some anthropogenic sources, but primarily stuff that the trees and the plants and the bugs in the soil are making.
Yes, yeah, the natural emissions are primarily, VOC emissions are primarily pinene and terpenes. There can be some other pollutants as well.
Make sure you saw Robin's hand too. So go ahead, Greg. Finish your.
I'm sorry. I guess I was just wondering if our melting glaciers are part of the natural emissions from soil and vegetation with the methane that's coming out of there. Or am I understanding this correctly?
Methane is not a volatile organic compound. If I remember my definition correctly, it is not one of the volatile organic compounds, so it's not included in this graph. I will show you a graph of greenhouse gas emissions later.
And maybe that gets to my question, but I know that we have an item on the agenda later that has to do with regulations around PM10 emissions, but I didn't see a PM10 pie chart. Why is that?
Yeah, they'll look pretty similar to the PM 2.5 pie chart. I, for sake of time, didn't want to include all the PM charts on here, so I chose PM 2.5 because that's one that we has gotten more.
It's pretty similar.
Yes, yes. So it would look very similar to this chart.
Okay.
Jim, I just have a quick question. Looking at these different things, what is classified as a commercial marine vessel? Because on the, I think 2 charts back, it did a lot of contributing to the.
Is that ferries?
Yeah. Let me see if I can find quickly.
I think it might have been the Vox chart that had a big chunk from commercial.
There we go. Emissions. So this is from Ecology's inventory. So emissions from ocean-going vessels and harbor vessels are included in that category. That's all the details I have, but there's more information on it in their background document.
So that
But-
you're,
Ocean going vessels and harbor vessels.
But it probably includes I would imagine it includes
imagine it would
ferries as well.
Ferries,
Um,
tugboats, barges, fishing boats,
Yep.
cruise ships. Cruise
Cruise-
ships that don't plug in when they're at the dock in Port Angeles.
that's a whole nother, a whole nother thing.
Yes.
Cruise ships. Yuck.
I have included at the end of my presentation a link to Ecology's report on their comprehensive inventory, which has a lot of details on how they came up with all or what's included in each of the categories.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Good questions.
Okay, so the next inventory I want to talk about is Orca's point source emission inventory. That is just on these point sources. And will not include anything on mobile sources or any of the other categories. Our definition of point source is slightly different from Ecology's. They were including in the point source or the large point source category, just sources that had air operating permits. Orca inventories those as well as some others. I'll just switch to the next slide here so I can show you. So in addition to the air operating permit sources, we also inventory medium and large size sources in our jurisdiction. So any of our registered sources that fall into our first 3 registration classes are synthetic minor sources, which are sources that have taken limits to stay out of the air operating permit program. And then our RC2 and RC3 sources, which have potential to emit of all pollutants over 10 tons per year. So we are inventorying between 80 and 90 sources every year out of the nearly 700 registered sources that we have. Our inventory process takes a full year to complete and is conducted primarily by Lauren and myself with some assistance from Jackie. We start with preparing the source specific inventory forms in December, and then we mail them out at the beginning of January. The source has 30 days from receipt to complete and return the forms. So they're typically due the second week in February, except for AOP sources get a little extra time. From February through June, we'll review those submittals, calculate emissions, and get the information entered into our database. And then in the fall, we conduct QA and get the data reported to EPA and Ecology before starting the process over again for the next year.
I just want to point out some great links coming in the chat from Dan and Odell to have folks be able to do more digging if they'd like. So.
Thanks. So I've got a few graphs similar to the last ones that are just showing for Orca's point source inventory. Again, these are just point sources. There's no mobile sources or any other source categories in here, and it does not include any of Orca's smaller sources, such as gas stations and auto body shops, dry cleaners. It's just those 83 sources that were on our inventory for 2020. So as you can see, carbon, as we talked about earlier, CO emissions are primarily from combustion sources. So you can see wood products industry emits the most of our CO emissions from sources on our, specifically on our inventory. I do want to point out that a quarter of the facilities on our inventory are wood products facilities. So they're by far the facilities that we have the most of on our in our inventory sources. That includes wood products facilities, includes lumber mills, veneer and plywood manufacturers, furniture manufacturers, and some other wood product facilities. So, and then as you can see, asphalt production and other manufacturers also contribute large portions. In our case, we call those that are other manufacturing or those that just don't fit into any of the other categories. So group those together. So the other next graph looks pretty similar. Not nitrogen oxide emissions, again, wood products facilities, as NOx emissions are also primarily from combustion sources, looks pretty similar, as wood products facilities are contributing the most to our inventory, as well as energy production, other manufacturers, and printing and paper products. PM 2.5 emissions. Again, wood products facilities are contributing the most. And we've got some energy production and printing and paper products bringing up the other larger portions of the pie. And lastly, VOC emissions. Wood products facilities, especially lumber mills, include lumber dry kilns, in which you're drying the wood. And so when you dry wood, you get a lot of volatile organic compounds being emitted. So wood products, again, what shows up as our largest contributor to VOC emissions from the sources on our inventory. And other manufacturers as well. A lot of our other manufacturing facilities are large VOC sources, such as we have an aluminum can manufacturer that applies coatings, a styrofoam manufacturer, and a couple of chemical manufacturers that are contributing to the VOC emissions. Before I go on to greenhouse gas emission inventories, does anybody have any questions on Orca's point source inventory? Since we still have a little bit of time, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about greenhouse gas inventories. Orca does collect a little bit of greenhouse gas data in their inventory, but we do not do a comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory. As you know, greenhouse gases are substances that contribute to climate change by trapping heat in the atmosphere. And so these are the 7 primary greenhouse gases that are inventoried, including most people know about with carbon dioxide and methane. Washington State does a greenhouse gas inventory every 2 years, measuring progress to a 1990 baseline. They primarily inventory these for different source categories: stationary combustion, such as boilers and other combustion sources; mobile combustion sources, such as cars and trucks; certain industrial processes that, where the process itself, not the combustion sources, generate greenhouse gases. So that would be cement manufacturer and aluminum manufacturer and ammonia. And then lastly, fugitive releases. Fugitive releases are those that don't pass through a stack vent or exhaust pipe, and they're specifically looking at production, processing, transmission, storage, or use of fuels and other substances. So those are the 4 things that they have inventoried. The last inventory that they published was in 2018. They're still working on their 2020 inventory. So I've pulled this from their report, and it shows the greenhouse gas 3-year average from 2016 to 2018 for the entire state. Ecology does not do a county by county greenhouse gas inventory, so it's just a statewide number. As you can see too, it's being reported as CO2e, which is CO2 equivalents. It is the total of all those greenhouse gases that we looked at on an earlier slide, and considers each gas's different global warming potential and reports it as a CO2 equivalent. So as you can see, transportation makes up a big portion of the greenhouse gas contributions, especially on-road gasoline usage here. Looks like they've separated out on-road diesel from on-road gasoline. So all the on-road emissions, as well as industrial sources, electricity consumption, and some other smaller sources like agriculture. And as part of Ecology's greenhouse gas inventory, Ecology requires point sources with emissions over 10,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalents to report to them annually. In Orca's jurisdiction, we have 9 sources that have been reporting annually to Ecology. That includes primarily our AOP sources that have wood-fired boilers like Interfor, McKinley, Sierra Pacific, and Weyerhaeuser. And we have 2 chemical manufacturers, Ascensus and REG, and then of course Grays Harbor Energy. Is there any questions on greenhouse gases inventories?
Just for clarification, Grays Harbor
Yes.
Energy is the natural gas power plant at Satsip?
Yes.
Thank you.
The one everybody reports that there's a fire on the hill when they go by at night.
Because of the steam cloud, right?
Mhm. And the lights on the steam. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. My last two slides are I just included the references here for the two reports that I pulled. Ecology's comprehensive emissions inventory and their greenhouse gas reports and data. So you can get more information on those if you're interested, as well as included EPA's link on greenhouse gases. So if anybody has any additional questions, I am in here.
Any more questions for Jennifer? Wow, it's cool to just kind of step back and see that picture. It's more reinforcing to me why we have a role in climate mitigation and adaptation, honestly.
Yes. If no one has any additional questions, I have a question for you. Would like to know if this was a helpful presentation and the right level of detail. Is this something that you'd like to see on a regular basis, on an annual basis?
Robin?
This was super helpful. I think the additional question I have is how emissions may have changed over time. And we might not have a lot of time today during this presentation, but I am curious to see if, policy efforts have resulted in diminishing emissions in certain areas, or if, the development of certain industries has grown it. So like that historical perspective would be cool to see in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I had the same comment about annually, like getting a little bit more of a trend data as well as the point in time.
Yep, I'll say that initially Jennifer had some of that data in, but we were, again, worried about time and the amount of time we're going to have this morning. But so we'll definitely come back to that and we can present that. But again, now that we've got this kind of a background and of sort of a emissions inventory 101, then we can come back and look at some of the trends over time and some of these emissions. So I don't know, perhaps later this fall or something, we can come back.
Well, and if you have the slides already, it's okay to just send them to us too. So, Frank?
Yeah, I would agree that it was very helpful. And I would also look forward to a little more of a in-depth what is going on and what are the trends, because I do think we need to start taking global warming and the associated dumping stuff into the atmosphere with a lot more gusto here before too long, or else we're going to find out it won't matter anyway. we won't be around.
Well, and watching the regulation of mobile sources, because that's the biggest thing that's not in our control. So, good point.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you, Jennifer. Super
Thank you.
helpful.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer.
That's actually a great tidbit video that you could pull out and use, some of that for other presentations to share the video. So nice job.
Thanks.
Okay, so we are going to the next item, which is also Jennifer, but is there a preemption from Jeff on this, or straight to Jennifer?
No, I think that was Jennifer. So the next thing is me. I think we're moving on to new business. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I just read the wrong line. My bad.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna look at the policies around recreational fires and food preparation and warmth for unhoused individuals. So Jeff?
Yes, so thanks, Jim. I'm sure Jennifer was surprised to hear that she was going to be covering
Come on,
this
Jennifer.
item. So yeah, let me just, I'll give a bit of an introduction here before opening it up for some discussion, but let me so I'm going to give some high level overview, then some specifics about why I'm bringing this to you now and what are some of the specific conversations that ORCAA is getting drawn into. So first, just want to acknowledge that homelessness, houselessness is obviously, it's a really complicated issue with no easy or clear-cut answers. Hopefully folks have had a chance to take a look at the briefing page that I worked on with Robert and with Dan. I think it explains some of the goals and provides some of the background here. So, and also note that we've got only a limited amount of time. So depending upon, again, what the conversation is, we'll see how much, whether we're actually able to get to a point where the board can agree on moving this forward or not, but we can certainly come back as needed at future meetings. So of course, this is a big societal issue. I know that there's lots of strong feelings about it. And of course, the causes of homelessness are many. ORCA is not going to fix them, but we do get drawn into homelessness issues because of the outdoor burning and the complaints that this generates. So whatever ORCA is doing to address these, it's really important that we're working closely with other local authorities that are, gone on the ground, and whether they be, again, local governments or nonprofits, whoever's, again, providing services. ORCA does have a very limited set of tools to respond to outdoor burning complaints. Really what we can do is we can issue a notice of violation and then a monetary penalty, either to the person doing the burning or to the property owner. Of course, the transient nature of many homeless individuals means that issuing them a notice of violation is not feasible. And then also there's issues with issuing a notice of violation to the property owners, oftentimes cities, Department of Transportation, sometimes private property owners, but again, that's problematic for a variety of reasons. So we don't have any really good tools. Another complication, at least in Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater, is ORCA Rule 6.2.7 subsection C, which prohibits all forms of recreational burning in the city limits. So again, recognize that this is an issue across ORCA's jurisdiction, but really talking about it here today, specifically focused on the 3 cities because of this particular prohibition on campfires in the jurisdiction. So let me just say that we worked with Robert to pull, how many, you might wonder, well, how many outdoor burning complaints do we get related to homelessness? Well, in the past 3 years in Thurston County, we received a little over 1,200 outdoor burning complaints, and roughly about 100 of those are, we think 96 or roughly 10% are due to homeless fires. So some high level context. Now, what led specifically to this proposed board motion? So soon after stepping into ORCA, started dealing with some outdoor burning complaints, kind of ironically enough, related to the Department of Ecology and to some of the unhoused individuals living in the woods that surround the Ecology campus. And so reached out to one of my contacts at Ecology. He connected us with the property manager with Department of Enterprise Services, who manages the property that the Ecology building sits on. And then also with the Lacey Police Department. There's some officers there that have spent a lot of time and done a lot of work with the folks living around the Ecology building. I'll note that this is a pretty highly managed situation between DES, Ecology, Lacey PD, St. Martin's University, others. They're really working to manage the situation. At one point a few years ago, there were, I think, over 30 individuals living there. They've been working to get people transitioned into transition housing and things. And so now I think it's down closer to 12. But anyway, we were getting a lot of complaints, smoke from nearby fires getting drawn into the air handling system at Department of Ecology. Into the HVAC system. And so Dan, Robert, and I met with the DES property manager, members of the Lacey PD, to talk about the situation and how we could work together to address some of the smoke complaints. So DES and Lacey PD felt that some direct outreach or some outreach efforts and help to educate the campers was going to be the best way to help address the situation. And so really to clarify that burning garbage and around burning garbage and other prohibited items, and to say, look, if you're going to burn, here's how we want you to burn. And so we work with them to put together some brochures that then they could hand out. But again, we quickly came to a situation where the official ORCA position in Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater is that no burning is allowed. But here we were working on a brochure that said, well, if you're going to burn, we want you to, don't burn garbage, and some other kind of fire safety related issues. And so the thought came up, well, it would be good to get some clarity on this sort of ORCA's official position on recreational burning in the 3 cities, and wanted to have a conversation with you, the board, about this, because again of this mixed messaging issue, and really wanting to be thoughtful and careful about how is ORCA getting drawn in to these conversations, and we wanted to have as clear a message as possible on it. And so, of course, workload is an issue as well. We've got very limited staff. We've got, as those numbers showed, we get a lot of outdoor burning complaints, so we have to be really careful with how we respond to them. And so it seemed, and that this motion, again, the motion is just to suspend enforcement of Rule 6.2.7 subsection C when the campfire is for the sole purpose of warmth or food preparation. And again, in a conversation with Jim a week ago, he suggested, well, maybe we call that survival burning, as a way to kind of separate that from, again, this isn't recreational burning, although in the ORCA regulations, campfires are referred to as recreational burns. And so the brochures that we've developed have been handing them out in Lacey. We haven't had any complaints there lately. Of course, the weather's getting warmer. I don't know if there's a connection between handing these brochures out and the lack of complaints, but I will say that we do get lots of complaints. And I think the most recent one was at the end of April, related to the Jungle, which is a large homeless encampment in Olympia, and it frequently impacts the inner city transit facility. And so again, have had conversations with Ann Freeman Manzanares there about that. And I know Fran, this is a long-standing issue that ORCA has been working on. But again, the thought was that this board motion would help clarify ORCA's stance. And then we would like to get a longer term conversation, I think, is to look at change, perhaps repealing this section of the rule. Again, the prohibition on recreational fires in Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater was put in place back in the early 90s because of PM10 non-attainment. Again, Robin, you asked a question a little earlier about PM10. That was at that point, so PM 2.5 was just starting to be regulated widely at that point. And so we're actually more focused on PM 2.5 now, and we can, again, have conversations about that going forward in terms of, well, what do we do if we change this prohibition? What's that going to do to our attainment? And that's a separate conversation. I don't want to try to derail this with that conversation, but I just wanted to point that out, that I think this is likely where that conversation is going to go. So I think that's all that I wanted to say. I know I've taken a few minutes, but hopefully this context has been helpful about sort of ORCA's role in this and why we're getting involved and what we're looking for here from this discussion and what we'd like to get from the board.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And I want to just give an opportunity for Lacey, Tumwater, and Olympia to chime in, because I know they've had a chance, hopefully, to talk to some of their staff and kind of weigh this out. I personally had trouble with it. Like it's a tough call, but it does feel like the right call. And for me, the emphasis, reminder that we aren't relaxing our code or our rules around nuisance smoke or garbage burning or the things that actually do cause the complaints to be more real. And so from Olympia's end, our fire marshal and our city manager and assistant city manager were on board with this. It does make sense. I think we want to be really careful when we talk about repealing the rule to make sure that it remains about food and warmth and doesn't turn into big bonfires. So,
yep.
Robin, anything from your end that you want to add, or Joan, before we go to the open discussion?
I think that designating these types of fires, specifically as survival fires, feels appropriate to me. I agree it's not ideal to have folks burning wood out in the woods, because in general we don't want that to be happening, but I also feel like this is a place where, until we can provide realistic alternatives. To take a position that this has to be prohibited and that we're going to fine people for doing this seems like sort of an unreasonable public policy, right? That could have really harmful impacts on people who are just trying to stay warm. So I think I agree, Jim, it's not perfect, but it's reasonable.
And I'll just add, I want to thank Jeff for giving and I think this is his way of doing business, is giving the impacted jurisdictions a heads up and letting us have some time to flesh it out with our team before we brought it to the board. And that was really helpful. Joan, anything you want to add before I open it up?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. John Doan, our city administrator, has been out on vacation for 2 weeks, so I do not believe has had an opportunity to weigh in on this. So Michael Matlock was the acting in his position, and also Brian Hurley. Those two officials did know about this because of the fire situation and knew kind of what was on the board. There is some hesitancy, not from them necessarily, but that Tumwater is concerned that saying people can't sit around in their backyard around their fire pit that is totally safe and whatever, but the folks out in the woods can. I'm saying that in, I don't mean it to be a crude way. I'm just saying we're limiting this and telling people they can't have barbecues or open pits in their backyards, but we're saying you can be out in the woods, and if you say you're cooking or you're cold, you can have a fire in a dangerous place. And so we're anticipating that we're going to get feedback and pushback from this when it hits the whatever it hits, the papers, the fan, the whatever. I think that what we were hoping for was maybe a little bit more time so we could talk about it at our public health and safety and the possible impacts. Now, what Jeff is saying is that particular part of the rule for backyard enjoyment of your fire pits is something that we may look at down the road and make some changes to. But I don't think we're sure what down the road is. And so anyway, I'm just throwing out all these things and different things that we heard in the brief time that we talked about it. So
thank you, Joan. That's good. That's really good feedback. And, whether we go forward or not, I think we can make sure we set a timeline for the down the road and give direction on that for sure. So, okay.
I think that would help if we do, because we're going to get these questions. Why not my backyard, but why the woods? And I just think we need to have, a satisfactory and well thought out answer to that, or a timeline for when we're going to relook at that rule.
Cool.
Yep. If I could just jump in very briefly, we've had multiple conversations within the agency, and yes, that concern about pushback and the rightful questions about, well, why again can't I burn in my safe backyard fire pit? And so, well, yet you're allowing this, and so I certainly understand. And I think you're right. Messaging is going to be really important. And again, this is a small step. So, but it's a important issue.
So just really quick before I go broader, are we actually enforcing this for people with houses right now? Like, we have so much volume. What would it look like if the motion just didn't say unhoused persons?
Well, if Robert's here, I'll let him kind of chime. It looks like so he was preparing to answer that. So go ahead, Robert.
So Jim, yes, we do get complaints. We do enforcement on the backyard fires within the city limits. From an enforcement standpoint, it's pretty tough on my staff to go up to somebody who's having a COVID enforced barbecue at their house with the literally the pup tent there and the kids in the backyard, and said you have an illegal fire. So I think this is a topic worth discussing. But yes, we do respond to those, and we have issued those the violation.
So could you conform to a motion that dropped the last 3 words?
I would, yes, but I also think that at some point, because I'm sure Jeff Myers would wish us to change our rule.
Actually do the rulemaking right away.
Yes.
Okay.
But rulemaking for us is pretty much a minimum of 6 months, just laying it out there for you.
Okay.
Jim, I want to make one other comment that came up. If we were to change this, as Robert's saying, because those are some of the comments that, you know, people who are going by the rules to have backyard, you know, burning, that it stays strong, that there is no garbage burning. There is no, to let people within the cities know we're not taking down, you know, burning big piles of garbage or leaves or that kind of thing, that this is specific to, you know, the entertainment or the food or warming your feet.
Frankly, it will allow us to focus on those really more problematic issues around burning prohibited items, garbage burning, and it does nothing. I mean, there's still the nuisance provision. So again, if your fire is impacting somebody else's ability to enjoy their property, I mean, then that remains in place. But again, I think it frankly clarifies ORCA's role and enables us to focus on the burning that's really most problematic.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna open it up. Greg?
Yeah, no, I really like the conversation that's happened so far. And, you know, I agree with Jill's comment in the chat too. I think if we can, while rulemaking happens, just, you know, keep it to these small backyard recreational fires, or as the motion recommendation says, for warmth and food preparation. And as Jeff says, allow it to ORCA to focus on the real hazard fires and the real polluting fires that we've talked about. I think that is a real compromise that works for me, but I would definitely defer to the 3 cities that are most impacted by this, if you have a different course.
Well, to your point, I'll also point out that it makes the rule consistent in the whole region. So other comments, Jill, can you lift up your comment from chat just so for the record? You're mute. There you go.
I don't know what you mean by lift it up. You mean read it?
Well, like say it so that it'll be in the record.
All right. I was thinking, is there something else I was supposed to do there? I just said that I don't agree with legalizing bad behavior, and the lawless people should not have more rights than law-abiding, responsible people ever.
Okay. So consistency is what I hear
Yes.
there. Yeah. Randy?
Yeah. I'm gonna be careful how I say this. I very much believe in sovereignty of the different areas, and I need a little bit of a clarification on a few things, if you don't mind. One is this a law that was put in place by these 3 entities that they're asking us or expecting us to enforce because they pay us a certain amount to enforce these rules? Or is this a rule that we actually created and put over the top of their area? Okay, so this is a rule that we put over the top of their area, and that they actually, their say is in this committee, not as a council or anything?
That's correct. Yeah, this was put in place as a result of the non-attainment from the 80s by ORCA.
And so they actually put it specifically on just those areas, huh?
Yeah, because it was just, I think it helped me somebody, but I think it was just Thurston County that was out of attainment. So it was those urban.
The reason it's the 3 cities is it's Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater were found to be non-attainment of federal air quality regulations.
So we're talking about putting it closer to what we have for everybody else. Because I'm worried about what Joan was saying. I want to make sure that we protect their integrity and their sovereignty, so to speak. But if it is our call, that changes things a little bit for thinking about it. But if we do decide to do something, we need to make sure that those entities, those cities and councils are protected. What I mean by that is community needs to know it wasn't their call. And if they want to complain, if they want to be angry, it needs to come to this group and this board and not them. Because apparently there's going to be, if I have a mix of understanding, I can imagine that the public will too.
Okay. Robin, I'm going to see just if there's any other comments from others first, okay? Other top of mind comments that we want to get on the table? Carolina?
Yeah, I'm just going to say really quickly, I'm kind of on the same wavelength as Greg. So in agreement, but kind of wanting to defer that to the cities and seeing what Jill is saying in making it uniform for everyone.
Do the cities want us to though? Because that puts them directly in that path, that firestorm. Is that what's necessary? I think we should maybe reach out to them and ask them if we want to have that discussion or if it should be handled in this area. Because if you do it the other way, which I always agree with, you're putting it right in the middle of a firestorm, as Joan had mentioned, that they're not prepared to have yet, it sounds like.
We're allowing backyard fires again. I think they're going to get, thank yous more than attacks if that compromise is reached.
Well, and frankly, Randy, one thing that is challenging in this is this regulation doesn't apply to our urban growth areas. So there's even confusion when a lot of people don't know if they're in the city limits or not all the time especially when they're more transitory. And so to me, it would make sense to have it be uniform around the region. So I'll go to Robin now.
Yeah, Lacey's boundaries are confusing for people who live in Lacey. Randy, I appreciate your using the phrase firestorm in this discussion, but I wanted to ask, like, have we, since these regulations were put in place in the 90s, have any of the jurisdictions failed the federal air quality standards review? Like, since we did this, like, did it work? And this gets to my question earlier about the historical trends for our air quality testing.
Let me answer that one since I've been around since day one on this whole stuff. As Jennifer pointed out in her slides, the biggest source of PM, particularly during the winter months around here, is going to be wood stoves. And won't share the numbers with you, but the air quality has continued to improve. It's been a steady downward line for literally decades at this point. To recognize that, EPA took us off their bad list. Last year was our final year, I believe. So we do have more flexibility in how we respond to this issue.
And no more ASARCO blowing into our urban area.
That's really helpful. I mean, I think if we go in the direction of the compromise where we allow recreational fires, I would be interested to see what happens to our air quality over the next year. Just if we see a bump up, or if it turns out that regulation of this issue isn't the biggest driver, and so it doesn't make much of a difference.
Right. Yeah. So if we open the rule, having some performance indicators, for lack of a better word, to make sure we're monitoring that in the permanent decision, not permanent, but more codified decision. Okay. Good comment. So Randy, I see your hand again.
So with all that being said, if this is our responsibility and we were to make the change that makes it the same across the board, as long as we let them know that this is a decision and a policy change with this board, it should help a lot. But we also need to remind the cities that nothing here restricts them from creating their own rule or law to put restrictions. I can put restrictions on the county aside from what you guys do. And I'm sure they can do the same in the city if that's what they choose.
Yeah, as long as there's no preemptions. I've never even thought about that before.
Yeah,
Randy,
it's just going to be us enforcing it. That's all.
Other comments? So Joan and Robin. Oh wait, Jeff. Let's go to our council.
Yeah, let me add a couple of things. What we are talking about is suspending enforcement policy. I have concern about doing that in a manner which implies that the rules have changed without formally undertaking rulemaking procedures. I think you're going to need to initiate that, and during the pendency of your rulemaking, if you want to de-emphasize certain enforcement matters, that's a matter of discretion. And I think you have the ability to do that. But I think initiating a rulemaking process is an essential component. Keep in mind that the definition of recreational fires limits those fires to certain sizes. And correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but also requires that people burn dry seasoned wood. And one of the problems with homeless individuals is they don't have access to dry seasoned wood, and hence smoke and emissions from those fires tends to be more problematic than smoke coming from your typical backyard campfire, which is being done with dry seasoned wood. And we're not talking about suspending burning of prohibited materials like garbage, and we're not suspending nuisance. So it is trying to, from the inspector's point of view, what we're going to ask them to look at when they get complaints is, are they burning prohibited materials like garbage? Are they within the size limits for recreational fires? And I think what we're going to expect those enforcement personnel to do is to educate people to try to comply with that, because I don't think that there is a great deal of understanding of what the rules are, even if you know where you are based on the boundaries, whether you're in an urban growth area or within city limits. I know when I lived within Lacey city limits, I was completely unaware. This is before I was legal counsel to Orca. And it was only when I became legal counsel that I realized that recreational fires in city limits were not allowed. And so
because everywhere else they are.
So like many others, I had a fire pit in my backyard. And I think addressing that through a rulemaking process and getting public comment on that is also very important from a procedural standpoint.
So Jeff, let me dig in just a little bit further on behalf of the board. Do you get to a comfort level if the motion includes initiating the rulemaking process as soon as possible?
I think that is, I think that should be done as well. And then in terms of the enforcement discretion, how the board wants to direct enforcement staff to proceed, making it, I kind of think back to when marijuana was illegal, and the direction from DOJ was to make it the lowest enforcement priority. It doesn't technically legalize it, it just changes your enforcement priorities. And certainly, I think if you look at enforcement against homeless individuals, you have to ask yourself, what is the proper way to enforce? And historically, Orca has taken the educate those individuals and taking a humane approach. The one other concern I have is the tool that Orca has in its arsenal is levying of fines. The case of the city of Seattle versus Long, dealing with parking infractions, dealt with the question as to whether fines for parking infractions violated the constitutional cruel and unusual punishment clause. And so the amount of fines that we would assess against individuals who don't have the resources to pay them could implicate the Seattle versus Long cruel and unusual punishment analysis. So it makes it a very complicated item to try to enforce against homeless individuals who may not have the resources to pay those fines, and could argue that you can't enforce against them.
Right. Okay. So I have to say, so I think, you know, where I'm at is looking at the clock and feeling like I should check in with my city staff before we went to fully opening it up. But I also think we need to get the rulemaking process going sooner than later. So let me go to Robin.
I was going to agree, Jim. I think I also want to check in with our fire district partners to see where they are at on this, because I understand there's been some conversations with Lacey Fire.
Okay. Joan?
Yeah, I'd like to just hear from you and from Robin as representing the city. What is our greatest concern or fear or whatever about allowing people to have backyard fire pits? Not for anything other than entertainment and warmth and having a glass of wine around.
Yeah. I mean, I have an environmental concern, you know, based on the charts we just saw and what I know from our inventory and our climate mitigation work. But I also think that this is a small piece in the whole big picture. You know, frankly, I think I'm ready to go, but I don't think my city would appreciate us doing this at the full scale of all of backyards without knowing it's coming. Because it's going to, you know, however it starts to get out and get around, it's going to result in a volume of work for the cities because they're the first responder, right? And so not everyone knows to call Greg or call Robert. They, you know, call 911 or call the non-emergency number at TCOM. And so want to make sure that all of the parties are ready for something like this. But I also know that delaying another month is, you know, if we look at 100 complaints last year, it's probably a handful. We could handle another month of conversation. I think Jeff told us that up front. So
Yeah, absolutely. Doing it deliberatively, we want to minimize the unintended consequences. So really support, again, the city is going back, talking to the rest of your council or others that you want to talk to. Let me know if there's folks that we at Orca need to be talking to. You know, I can work with team here to figure out steps towards commencing rulemaking. What would that process look like? What would a reasonable timeline be? So yeah, I think it makes sense to come back to this once we've all done, or a number of us have done a little bit more work on it.
Robin?
I think twofold. What I heard from my city manager is a concern about fire danger in the really hot, dry summer months. And that was echoed by Lacey Fire when he had conversations with them. And also just from a personal perspective, my mom had multiple chemical sensitivities, and when people would burn fires around us, it would cause her a lot of problems. It would cause migraines or make it harder for her to work. And so I'm sensitive to the individual impacts of recreational burning in the city. I think burning clean wood is a way to prevent that or diminish that risk. But, you know, it has an impact on our neighbors when we burn in our backyards.
Good point. So, Robert,
I just want to.
Oh, go ahead, Joan, real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because when I talked to Jeff about this, I think it was after you and Robin had already talked, and what I brought up to begin with, which is, you know, we want to be compassionate, but we also have to be fair, and so that was kind of where, you know, Tumwater came down, and then to bring up and talk about where this rule came from and the history like Robert gave us and so forth. And I think we're into a bigger, more important, if you will, issue for our cities than just allowing, you know, the houseless people to burn. So I'm glad to have this conversation and to have this extended because there are still people that I think need to weigh in my city. But personally, I'm for allowing people to burn in legal pits in their backyards.
Carolina?
Thank you. I was wondering, don't the cities participate in the Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee? And I'm wondering if this can be a presentation to them because I know many fire chiefs serve there. So I'm just wondering if like maybe a partnership with them and getting different inputs. Just
Yeah,
for
that.
thought.
So Regional Fire Authority is just a conversation between Tumwater and Olympia to create a new fire department government entity. But I think there is some sort of meeting of the chiefs or commissioners in the county. The place that the most people are represented is at either at 911 or Medic 1.
So maybe the 911. I'm just seeing on ways that where we could partner with other agencies where the message can spread through easier.
Right.
And
well, from an education standpoint, definitely. Yep. I think to move
and 911 doesn't have regulatory authority.
No, but it has people sitting around the table that
it has. It's the people that you you might want to talk to, but
so I'm inclined to think that if Robin, so if Joan and I talk to our cities where we have fire, and kind of get an idea around the bigger change, and then Robin checks in with Lacey Fire District 3 to get their opinion and her city, and then what I would suggest is that we continue this conversation next month with that input. I wonder, Robert, do you need a motion to direct you to start rulemaking, or can you kind of just do that and bring us the proper decision-making path as soon as possible?
We can prepare paperwork for you, what a draft rule might look like, the change, timelines, all of that for you. And it would certainly be ready for next month that we could have that discussion. No, I do not need a motion at this time.
Okay. Randy, you had a hand.
I think we may be confusing things a little bit, or at least I'm confused a little bit. Seems like we have a couple of different things going on. If it is to just allow one person to be outside the rules, as Commissioner Jill had mentioned, then that's not the appropriate way to go about it. But if it is a reprioritization of how we're enforcing it, as Jeff had mentioned, could be contemplated, that's a whole different discussion. That's a lot simpler. If it is going to be the other, I think we need to start that rule change process now. And all those communications you guys are talking about, if a good rule change process was put into place, should incorporate all those people, all those opinions and everything. It doesn't have to be done next week if it's done right. So I think we ought to actually consider looking at an actual rule change, because I don't like doing things without the rule change. I don't like having just exemptions for a certain class of people. So I don't know. I'd like for us to consider going through the process of the rule change. Not that we would change the rule. It's the process to find out what everybody is saying, what everybody's thinking, and then we come together to change the rule. But other than that, asking our folks to prioritize or reprioritize down to a lower level that particular thing for cost savings and stuff, I don't think is far beyond us right now.
Okay. Yeah, so we do have two things, and so I want to really clarify that. So the motion in front of us in the packet is a deprioritization of enforcement. What I'm hearing from the three cities that are impacted is that we want to talk more before we look at the possibility of making that universal and not just about the unhoused. And then I think I have consensus that we want to move forward to a rulemaking process as soon as possible. Does anybody disagree with that? Okay, so Jeff and Robert, is that a good enough direction for you for next month? And then Robin and Joan and I will get back to you as soon as possible around the idea of making about for the deprioritization about everyone. And I think I might ask Jeff Meyer to look at the motion and reword it so it's really clear that it's not any suspension. It's a deprioritization. Good?
Yep, I think that works for this, Jeff.
Meyer?
For me.
Okay. Randy, is that applause or another hand?
No, and can we just give our director In the meantime, the authority to prioritize what they think our staff should be and should not be doing according to priorities until we give a definitive how it should be done.
And that was what I was going to say to close it out, is that I think that our director has that power already.
But thanks for confirming it.
Yes. Great.
So thanks, everybody. This took a while, but I feel I am pleased with where we got with this conversation. I will work with Robert and others here to, again, bring this back for further conversation in June. And I think this is a really good, I'm happy with how this is moving forward.
Yeah, it's a really important conversation, and probably one of the more confusing things about how we regulate. So even being on the board, this is my 10th year. It's, sometimes I don't remember what you're allowed to do and what you can't in the cities. So okay, so we have we want to go to executive session to talk about the performance of our executive director, like in the next 8 minutes. But I want to check in with folks because we do have directors' reports and see, does anyone have a hard stop at noon, or would the board and Debbie and Jeff and Dan be able to stick around till like 12:10 if we needed to? Would everybody, Jill?
I have a meeting at noon that I have to go away for, so I need to leave by at least 5 till.
Okay. Well, I think that will get us through the bulk of things. If you're okay, if we continued without you, if we went over, are you okay with that, Jill?
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Any other comments or hard stops, just so we can track it? Okay. Let's keep moving then, and we're gonna just ask directors to lift up the most important things, especially if they're things that we don't already have in our packet, just for the sake of time. And I apologize, and we'll try to give you a little more time next month to tell us. I know you're still doing amazing work. So with that, I'm gonna go to Robert on compliance.
Well, the important stuff I can probably say in a couple of sentences here. So we are down 1 inspector, which, okay, for those of you in large organizations doesn't mean much, but that's 20% of us. So it is a big impact. We do have some initial interviews set up starting this afternoon through Friday to hopefully fill that position as soon as possible. I was also going to do a quick call out to Thurston County Community Development Environmental Health. I get to participate with their monthly compliance meetings, and because we do have several similar clients, unfortunately, and but that is a very helpful meeting that happens monthly. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Any questions for Robert? All right, if you know any good folks, send them his way. Okay, Mark, engineering.
You got Jennifer today.
Oh, sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
Just a few things I wanted to point out. We did issue an AOP renewal permit for Sierra Pacific Industries at Aberdeen Lumber Mill at the end of April. We've got an application from Cindy of Yelm to propose some upgrades to their wastewater treatment plant, which includes increasing plant capacity. Lauren has been working with them and getting more information to make sure we have enough to review that application. She and I did go out for a tour of lot last week to get some more training on wastewater treatment plants, so that was very helpful. And as Mark, I think, mentioned in a previous board meeting, we did receive an application from Brady Trucking for a compost facility on Johns Prairie Road in Shelton. He has completed a draft permit, is currently being reviewed internally and by the facility. Does anybody have any questions on those or any of the other permits in the report?
Questions for Jennifer?
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us to Odell for air monitoring. I can't hear you. It looks like you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. Nope.
Nope.
No.
Can't hear you.
Next to the mute button, there's a little caret that can let you pick microphones. You might have more than one.
Nope, we can't hear you.
Never heard anyone call that a carrot before. A little arrow.
Yeah, I don't know.
The same thing, Robin. That's what that's called.
Oh, there you go.
Did that work?
Yeah.
Yes, whatever you just did.
Okay, I just took out the USB and plugged it back in. So yeah,
Go
I might want to
Microsoft.
upgrade our little system here. But so I'm going to share screen. This should not take very long at all. Screen 2.
Odell, as you're doing that, I'm pretty sure your camera's frozen, so you might want to free up that resource on your computer by turning it off.
Yeah, it's not wanting to let me do any of that. So let me try that. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Sorry for that. I know I just took up all the time that Robert and Jen saved us, so apologies. I will be as fast as possible. I did want to add one thing to the earlier discussion about campfires and city limits. Just as a side note, they are allowed in Seattle and Tacoma, which are high density communities. So for those of you who are concerned about the impact on air quality, we can just look at their data and those communities if we want to get a sense of how that would impact us. And I think we have a lower population, so just wanted to throw that out there, and I'd be happy to work with Jeff on putting something like that together for the future. Okay, that's it. Okay, there we go. So no surprises here. May, we had good air quality across the board. And I also want to note that our average summer air quality in most of our locations is somewhere between 2 and 4 micrograms per meter cubed, which has definitely come down. From when I started working here, I used to notice that our air quality in the summer months, at least, the baseline was hovering around 5 micrograms per meter cubed. So that has definitely a shift downward by a few micrograms. So I got all the data from March and April for our Grays Harbor saturation study. I have more than doubled the number of sensors by using the purple air sensors, which is creating a big mess when I try to plot out and show you guys the data. So I really do need to find a better way to do that. But I just want to point out right here, the solid thick dark blue dash line is the Aberdeen nephelometer, which is our monitor. And then Harbor High School is the solid red line, which is the purple air sensor that I co-located with it. And then the rest of these are sensors that are publicly owned. This was the only thing of note there. We saw a big spike at both Seabrook and at Cohasset Beach, which is over by Westport on this day. And I tried to figure out if we were getting something in off the coast, if there was like smoke circulating around or coming back in on the coast. But there was some kind of coastal event on that day that we saw at 2 sites separated from each other. So some interesting data coming out of this study. We have now started our ozone, summertime ozone monitoring in Thurston County. We are once again hosting the Department of Ecology's federal equivalence or federal equivalence method, the T400. Ozone analyzer shown here in red, and then in blue you can see our little lower cost, smaller ozone sensor that we operate at the site year round and subject to less quality control. But I'm really pleased to see these two analyzers side by side and how well our little 2B ozone analyzer agrees and functions. It's a robust little analyzer and it's giving us good data out there at Mountain View when we don't have Ecology's backup monitor there. So that will operate through the summer. Really quickly, I don't think it's been mentioned, but we talked last time about the state has switched from the WACA to the AQI. I think Dan is going to talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted, for those of you unfamiliar, to illustrate what that means specifically. So the index WACA and AQI are the same, and it's just the 0 to 50 is good, 51 to 100 is moderate, So that's not going to change. The colors are not going to change. If I didn't even tell you about it, you probably wouldn't have realized that it changed. But then over here, you can see what that actual difference means. And it just has to do with classifying at what point in PM 2.5 concentrations we make that switch to the different categories. So previously the switch from good to moderate were the same for WACA and AQI, but you can see, and you know, feel free to look at this chart in the future, but you can see the changes where instead of switching to moderate at 20.5 micrograms per meter cubed, the AQI switches to moderate at 35.5 micrograms per meter cubed. So while it's slightly less protective, we think that the advantages we gain in consistency with the rest of the country and the rest of the state in messaging is actually a better, it's worth it. And Dan's going to talk a little bit more about the messaging around that and how we've sort of, I guess, struck a compromise between switching to AQI, but still maintaining a protective status. So that's all I have on that. Other monitoring news, very excited to tell you that I finished testing our Purple Air with a solar panel setup, which gives us flexibility of installing a Purple Air anywhere we have Wi-Fi, but we're not limited by power source. It is self-contained in that respect. We installed it at Central Park Elementary, that is in Grays Harbor, outside of Aberdeen and Cosmopolis. And that was because we had some citizen activists who really wanted a Purple Air sensor installed in that community. So we were able to do that for them. And I'm really happy to say that that's been done and seems to be working great. I think last time I mentioned that Robert Weiland, who is one of our compliance officers, is also going to be helping me with as backup and doing the quarterly QCs. So we've continued to train him. And then Chica Peak, one thing I just want to mention about that is we did get our funding for the infrastructure upgrades at Chica Peak, and that grant has been submitted to EPA. Even though it's already been approved, we still have to go through the grant application process. And I didn't finish the sentence on this slide, so I apologize for that. But anyway, we should have the funding, and that grant will become active in July, on July 1st. So that is all I have, unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Odell. Particularly thanks for reminding us about the AQI. It's in a time when everyone's an air quality expert now because of wildfires. It's an important shift. So, any questions for Odell? Okay, we're gonna go to Dan for communications.
Really quick, again, on the AQI WACA, it's a seamless change. 99.9% of the public will never know the changes there. They're looking at the color and the score on that. They don't look at the data numbers. So it's actually a simplification that has nothing, the only impact on people will be easier to understand. So that's the message there. We issued a request for proposals for renovating our website in advance of hoping the budget passes with that funding. And if the budget passes with the 25,000 allocation for that process, by issuing the RFP now, we should be able to sign a contract by early to mid-July and get that process going immediately. So that's the big news. Outdoor burning education, as you just heard, is a big part of the work this time of year. And wood stoves program is taking off. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for Dan? Okay. Go ahead, Joe.
Actually, I have a compliment. I really liked what he did for the what'd you call it, Dan? That you did a different thing each day for clean air awareness and.
Yeah, so last week was the Air Quality Awareness Week, nationwide, National Air Quality Awareness Week. So we did posts each day on that and tied it to our program and tied it to some of the national outreach as well.
Yeah, I thought it was very, very well done. And I watched it. I felt like a kid watching, got a favorite show or something. And I checked in every day. Thank you. You're doing excellent excellent work, and I appreciated that very much.
Thank you. And I will note that did spur a jump in wood stove recycling applications as well. So.
Oh, good, good. Well, thanks again.
Great. Anything else for Dan? Okay. Go to Lynn, admin updates.
Hey, good morning, all. I just want to do a shout out to our finance committee. It was a good session this morning, so thank you, Greg and Jim and Randy. Really, I'll just defer additional comments, having to circle around our transitioning to our new ADP vendor for payroll, and financially, we're in a good position. Unless you have questions for me on the financial reports, proposed budget, I'm going to close and wish you all well and be safe.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Questions for Lynn?
Thank you.
Just a good opportunity to remind people to read Lynn's memo if you do nothing else before you get the final proposal from the Finance Committee in your packet next month.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, that takes us to Jeff for the Executive Director's update.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. So again, I'll try to keep this pretty quick. Just on the ORCAA to AQI transition, just I've attached an email to the email that I think I sent out last week that had the official Department of Health. It had an email from Department of Health that had a variety of links. Department of Health and Department of Ecology worked really hard to update some outreach materials on this. There's focus sheets. There's an updated information on wildfire smoke, and they did a lot of outreach with local health jurisdictions as well. And so just wanted to call that to your attention as well. So if you haven't looked at that email that was part of what I sent out last week, and you want more information on this, take a look at that email, or I could, either I or Dan could certainly send it again if that would be helpful. Happy to report that Christopher Kraus, our new IT system administrator, started on April 15th, and he's working out great. He's been a quick study, been learning Orca's IT systems, and he stepped in with some great knowledge, skills, and abilities, and so he's really hit the ground running. He would be here today, and I would have introduced him to all of you, but today is his daughter's 7th birthday, so he's out spending the day with her. But I will try to get him to our June meeting, just so you can meet him briefly. One thing that Chris has been working on, putting together some technical upgrades to our board and our conference room. And so I'm hoping that in the next couple of months, we'll have the technology in there to transition to doing hybrid meetings. And so I know from past conversations, some of you will likely always look for the opportunity to participate remotely just because of your distance from Olympia. But I also like to have the option of participating here in the Orca offices for those that are closer. And because obviously there's something to be said for getting together in person. So I'm hoping that again in the next month or so we'll have that technical capacity to do that. Odell already mentioned that we've got, again, actually just yesterday submitted the information to grants.gov in terms of the Chica Peak money. So that'll be an additional $131,000 for next year to upgrade the Chica Peak Observatory infrastructure upgrades there. So a lot of work. So kudos to Odell and Lynn for getting that submitted. And then just one quick question. So the last 3 months, I've been sending out draft agendas, like earlier in the week before Debbie sends out the final agenda and materials on Friday. It takes a little bit of extra work, but I don't know, is that helpful, or is it helpful seeing a draft agenda or earlier in the week, or is just waiting until Friday and seeing the final agenda and all the materials? Is that work for everybody? It's happy to send out the draft agenda, but it is a little bit of additional work for Debbie and myself to get those things together early. Again, happy to keep doing it, but I just wanted to check in with you to see if we should keep doing it. So we don't.
I mean, I'm never in favor of additional work, but I think it is useful to see the draft agenda, because if there's something we're hoping to talk about or address or get an update on and we don't see it, we could provide that feedback before the agenda is finalized.
I could go either way. I don't really have a preference. If staff would prefer not to do it, we can always request an agenda item ahead of time, or modify our regular agenda meetings too. So I've never made a recommendation to change it. So if I would be okay if staff wanted to change that practice.
Well, I'm guessing that's why he's asking, because it's radio silence in between.
Exactly. Haven't heard anything back. Nobody has said, hey, add this to the agenda. But again, the reason why we did it was because of Robin's desire. Hey, if I don't see something on there that I want to be on there. But as Greg pointed out, we can certainly do that at the beginning of our meetings too. So
I prefer you to do less work and let us be vigilant to look it over and to request a change to the agenda to add it. And we can give you a heads up that we're going to do that, or we can tell Jim ahead of time or something. Save you and Debbie that extra time.
Right, I agree. We don't need to create extra work.
I see nodding heads and consensus, Jeff. So you take
Okay.
that off your plate, and everyone knows that they can try to amend the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, and that they would be more successful if they checked in with Jeff and I about it beforehand. At least in getting it accomplished in that meeting time, just because often our time is full, and that's the bigger concern. So, but
Great.
that's the one thing we are in control of is our agenda. So.
yeah. Well, thanks for that input. I appreciate it. And so that's all that I had. Again, looking at the time, I think you've heard from the rest of the agency. So I'll just leave it at that, unless
Okay.
there's any particular questions that you have for me.
Greg, go ahead.
I had one question, and I just wondered, Jeff, if you can talk about the upcoming OPMA changes and how that might impact our meetings and our desire for virtual meetings that I think that we expressed.
Yeah, is that directed to me or to Jeff Myers?
Oh, well, whoever wants to take it, I know it's a hot potato, but there's big changes coming.
I haven't dug in. My understanding is that as long as there is a public, an opportunity to call in or have the, or a Zoom option, that's sufficient. But and again, given the fact that my thought was that for the time being, because of Orca's, because of the conference room situation and the technology, I think having a hybrid meeting with our current technology would be really difficult. And so my intention was to keep basically in this virtual mode, at least until we've upgraded technology. And my quick read of it was that, well, as long as and I think I had a quick conversation with Mike Throgmorton last week about it, and from what I understood of his direction was that, yeah, as long as you've got these other options that you're okay. But I do need to look more at the MRSC and the other guidance on it.
Let me address that, because I think the governor's most recent proclamation is rescinding the OPMA limitations that have been in place for the last 2 years. And that is going into effect on June 1st. So there is also the adoption of House Bill 1329, which amends the Open Public Meetings Act, that allows you to proceed with hybrid only meetings if there is a locally declared emergency that it's not reasonably safe to hold in-person meetings. If you don't have that locally declared emergency, the process that is now required in the OPMA allows members to attend remotely, but would need a physical location for members of the public to be able to attend to provide public comment.
And Jeff, if I may, I think there's an exception. If the governing body held some of its regular meetings remotely prior to March 1, 2020, I'm reading from the MRSC document, they may continue to hold these meetings remotely with no declared emergency.
That's
so
correct.
long as the public may also attend remotely. So since we did occasionally, I believe, I think we did.
I'm not sure that we had remote meetings prior to the governor's proclamation at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, we just had remote attendees of the board.
We allowed some remote attendance, but there was always a physical location for the meeting prior prior to the restriction that the governor's proclamation put on.
So Jeff and Jeff, can you get together and make sure we're where we need to be for June? Carolina,
think
really quick.
Yeah, unless you think having an in-person component would create an unreasonable risk to public safety, which we would have to probably pass some sort of emergency declaration. And I know that I know that some jurisdictions, like Lot, for example, is considering that, I think tonight. But I would think you should be prepared to at least open the doors to the public at the June meeting. If you want to continue to allow remote attendance by the members here, you can do that, because the act now specifically allows remote attendance. But we need to be technically set up so that the public could come in, hear what's going on in the meeting, just like we're doing virtually, just like we give them access to, so that they could either attend virtually or go to a physical location. I think it's very unlikely that we're going to get a lot of people, but we have to allow for that possibility.
And we are next month, we are doing the public hearing around our budget. So yes, so I'll work, Jeff, maybe you and I'll reach out to you. We can talk about that. I'll review the MRSC and other documents. And so we'll be ready for the next meeting, and we'll make sure that we're in compliance.
Okay. So order the owl today.
Yep.
And
or tomorrow when Chris is back.
And
we
then
can
Robin
continue to
and
monitor sort of what's going on in the community as far as case rates. I know in the last 4 weeks, Thurston County Public Health has seen an increase from 189 weekly cases to over 500 weekly cases. I know I'm one of them, so which is why I'm sitting at home.
Sorry, Jeff.
so this is a question. Is there a county-wide emergency in Thurston County still?
There is, and it doesn't expire. That's what I was going to ask. If does the county one cover this one? And since Orca is located in Thurston County, does it cover Orca because of that? Because ours doesn't expire until late June, and from the conversations we've had, we're going to expand it for a couple more months. So not
But
sure.
I don't know that the county's declaration specifically addresses Open Public Meetings Act and the need to have a physical location as required by OPMA. And the governor's proclamation did suspend that. I can take a look at that issue a little closer and work with Jeff on it.
Right. So, but lacking us being able to take a motion to agree to use that emergency as our cover and suspend public, gathering in our facility, we still in June we're gonna have to have that option. It sounds like, unless something
or
changes
possibly try to
statewide.
convene a special meeting
beforehand
to address an emergency declaration.
Okay. So Jeff and Jeff get together and help us. And if we need to be in person, I'll just ask that the Thurston County reps try to be there, so it's not just an empty room, if we feel comfortable. So
I will send Jeff Johnston the declaration from Thurston County.
Great.
Cool.
Thanks, Carolina.
Okay. Important conversation. So thank you a lot today. And at this point, we're going to go into executive session I'm going to say, start the performance evaluation of our executive director. It's supposed to be informal. So today I'm going to say we're going to go into executive session for the purposes of performance management as allowed under RCW 42.30.110. We'll be gone for no longer than 20 minutes, and we will come back to adjourn the meeting in the live Zoom room. So at this point, Dan, can you put everyone make me a host and put everyone except yourself in the waiting room, and then I'll move you, and we'll move quickly through this. And then if we need to, we can take more time next month.
Okay. And I would just note to staff, if you don't want to come back just for adjournment, please leave the meeting. It'd be easiest. And I'm going to pause the recording at this time, if that's
Jeff
okay with you, Jim.
Yeah, go
Jim,
ahead.
There you go.
Okay, the Olympic Region Clean Air Agency Board is back from executive session after conducting a glowing performance review of our executive director's first 90 days, and I'll work to get those comments and some comments into his file for his benefit and for future use, and just ask if there's anything for the good of the order before we adjourn.
So I got updated name plaques for our wall board and I've got one for Jeff. Is it safe to put him on now?
I think so. Yeah, his probationary period is over.
Okay, so he's now on the wall as executive director.
Okay.
That's how you know you've made it.
That's right.
Exactly.
So we just have to go there so we can see the plaque now.
That sounds like perhaps in June.
Right. I'll be there. Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Great meeting. It was a lot, but we really appreciate you hanging out.
Good work.
Thanks, everybody.